Hey there, and welcome to Retro Robot Radio Reviews. And today we're going to be looking at a couple of my Micronauts action figures, starting with a closer look at the Time Traveler action figure. The Time Traveler was the basic Micronauts figure released by Mego in 1976, and it is based on the mold used for the Microman 100 series action figures that were first invented in 1974 by Takara. Now, I built these four figures out of some part slots until I got them all going. These are the four original colors for the figures. We have a clear one, a yellow one, a blue one, and an orange one. Now, these figures were just kind of randomly packed in on the cards and also with some of the vehicles by Mego back in the day. And as you can see, they have different chest molds and then also four different color bodies. Now, Mego randomly packed them in, so you just got a random figure every time you got it with a different color body and a different chest mold. But the original Takara Microman figures actually were four individual characters. They were George, Jack, Jesse, and John. I guess it was exotic to have them have American names back in 1974 Japan. And they specifically had the radio dial on the white one, the engine dial looking one on the yellow one, the radar looking one on the blue one, and the little window panes on the orange one. So that's how I built these four guys when I was putting them together. These are in their classic Microman configurations. The figures themselves are 3 3/4 inch action figures. In fact, they're pretty much the earliest form of 3 3/4 inch action figure you could find out there. These are pretty standard, except for the fact that I added in this stand. This is a stand that I design and print out myself. It's two 5mm pegs that just fit perfectly inside the feet holes on the figures. The figures themselves have ball-jointed ankles, and then knee articulation, waist articulation ball joints, a O-ring style waist, a joint out and forward for the shoulder, a joint at the elbow, a ball-jointed wrist rotation. We have rotation at the cup, and then again at the wrist, and then a ball-jointed head. If you're familiar with G.I. Joes, this is very similar to what G.I. Joe ended up using. In fact, it is a bit superior to the original G.I. Joe in that it has so many ball joints worked into it, whereas the original Joes did not. Also, one other thing that they have that the Joes did not have is there's actually a rubber tubing going from one arm to the other across the chest. You can kind of see it here on the clear figure. And that rubber tube allows the arms to not fall. They stay in place very well because they're in the tube. And also the head on the ball joint is rubbing against the rubber tube, which means the head stays in place and doesn't just flop around. So the addition of that rubber tube keeps the arm and head from being floppy. As these figures age, sometimes the T-hook in the waist or the rubber band for the O-ring will get loose or break. That is a repair that can be made, though. Another point of breaking on these is the ball joint on the ankles will pop on occasion on those figures. And I do make 3D printed replacement feet that can go over a broken ball joint and add a replacement foot. It doesn't have any more articulation in the ankle, but at least it has a foot with my replacement boots. But these are all original feet, and as you notice, the feet actually have a small piece right above it, like a spat for a boot. So that gives it an extra little bit of detail there. Now, these figures also came back from Mego with a connector on the back It's called a body fixture in the instructions. And a lot of people didn't know what these were if they just got the action figures. But if you got one of the vehicles, you'll notice that a lot of the vehicles, not all of them, have this hole in the seat. And what you can do is line up the body fixture peg with the hole in the seat, and that will hold the figure in place. There we go. Get that on camera. So now you don't have to worry about the figure falling out of his seat when he's driving around. And a lot of these early vehicles actually came with a figure too. Now, the very earliest Microman releases did not have the 5mm peg on the back that these guys have. They used a clip instead to hold it in the seat, and this clip would often break. But after the first year, they worked out that a 5mm hole in the back to hold this body fixture peg was the best design. The figure itself has a 5mm hole in each of the feet and the 5mm hole in the back. And also the wrist cuffs are actually a 3mm peg and port, meaning that you can potentially replace a wrist with a accessory or some kind of upgrade. Anything that has a 3mm hole can plug into that. And in fact, some of the later figures in the line would have a cuff or weapon that fits in that 3mm peg. One of the cool things about these figures is that because they are made of translucent plastic, you can actually see individual bubbles inside some of the body parts. Like this one has a bubble inside of his upper arm, one in the lower arm, whereas this figure has a bubble in each of these, but not in this arm. I'm not sure if that's because I assembled them from parts of different figures, but there are differences, and that makes each figure unique in the placement and shape of its bubbles. Now, these are the 1976 Mego release. There were other releases over the years. In fact, Mego's later release had a line of opaque figures that came out, similar to these, just not clear plastic anymore. And then they were re-released by Our Toy in the 80s as Cosmo Men. And then Palisades Toys released the Time Traveler mold again in the 2000s. That Time Traveler came in a variety of different colors, including black and glow-in-the-dark and solid colors. And one of the nice things about the Palisades release is instead of a random chest piece, it actually came with 6 chest pieces in each with each figure card. And you could choose which one you wanted from the 4 original, and they made up 2 new ones just to be cool. And they gave the figure a stand. It was just a standard square stand, not the little Micronaut symbol like that. This symbol is actually the sticker on the chest of the Microtron Micronaut figure. I thought it was a cool shape, so I made it into a figure stand. So you have the 4 original Time Traveler designs here, and then later on the opaque ones, the Cosmo Men, and then the Palisades release. Maybe we'll take a look at them in another video, but feel free to check these out. You can find them online. Oftentimes you can find them cheap in broken lots. That's what I ended up doing, getting several broken lots and then just repairing these using a standard small screwdriver and replaced the O-rings. Unfortunately, the T-hook ball joints for the waist are not the same shape as size as G.I. Joe's, but I do 3D print replacement ones. You can actually 3D print the waist piece out of nylon. If you get it the right size and shape, it works just as good as the original metal hooks. In fact, it makes a white inside instead of a silver inside, but it looks pretty cool. These figures are assembled similar to a G.I. Joe, where they have a screw inside the hole on the back. The shoulders and elbows are rivets, and then the legs are 2 screws as well. So there's 3 screws total and 4 rivets total holding this together. So unfortunately, that means broken arms are not really repairable. They just have to be swapped out. But broken legs can be fixed by replacing just the individual leg piece. I also have a 3D printed lower leg, but unfortunately I don't have any printed in translucent colors, just solids. Funny little story about the origin of these figures. The rivets holding the shoulder and elbows together were actually one of the things holding this figure back from a design. The original figure they built was about much larger version. This was scaled down to only 3 3/4 inch size. And when they were trying to scale it down, because they realized to make vehicles for the larger figures, which were called Henshin Cyborg, it would have been too expensive and you would have to have very large vehicles. So in order to make vehicles for these figures, they scaled them down to Microman size. Now, when they built them at this size, they couldn't really make the joints work for them. And the guy who was the designer for these figures was shopping, and one day he found a pair of tiny travel nail clippers at the store. They had been made locally in Japan, and they were just a tiny little pair of nail clippers held together by one little rivet. And he thought, that is exactly the sort of thing he needs for the joint. A tiny, tiny, simple rivet that would hold 2 moving pieces together. So he went and found the factory that was making the nail clippers and found out their source for the tiny rivet that was holding the nail clippers together. And he used that in the design of the action figures to make the joint on the shoulders and elbows, which is again used later on figures like G.I. Joe's. It's just a standard design now for 3.75-inch O-ring action figures. And now you can find them everywhere, and it's all because somebody found them on a pair of nail clippers back in the 1970s. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this quick look at the Micronauts Time Traveler figures, and let me know what your favorite color is. Do you like these ones, or do you like one of the later releases? And let me know what other Micronauts figure reviews you'd like to see in the future in the comments below. This is Matt from RetroRobot Radio. Take care.